We're back here on the Greg Peterson Experience on VSiN, the Sports Betting Network. Great to be joined by Raheem Palmer in studio. He does terrific work over at The Ringer, and on top of everything that he does at The Ringer, I know that he does a great job of being able to follow the fight scene as well. And Raheem, it's always a pleasure to have you aboard, my friend. Thank you.
It's always an honor. I'm just happy to be in the city right now in Vegas, really enjoying, my time out here in the desert, getting some good bets in, eating some good food. So life is good.
Yes, absolutely. And a 24/7 city as well. A lot of folks out there, I know that they can relate when things are closed by 10 p.m. That can be a little bit of a bummer, and that's part of the reason why I love living out here in Las Vegas, even though I myself am a little bit of a Wisconsin transplant. And let's touch upon, well, the city that you typically live in, and that would be Philadelphia, the city of brotherly love. And I know you took quite a bit of a position on them in the futures market coming into the season. Right now, the Eagles are the only undefeated team. What have you made just out of both them and the NFC East as a whole? Because I take a look at the Eagles, and I've been highly impressed by them, but at the same time, it looked like the Cowboys were completely dead when Dak Prescott went down, and, well, the Eagles, they still have quite a bit of competition in the division.
Oh, yeah. We look at this Eagles team. They are for real. Obviously the defensive line is a problem. And Jalen Hurts has really surprised me because I felt like that would be the thing that would hold this team back. And, he seems to be able to make the plays, obviously. And Sirianni, look, coming from Philadelphia, I've seen him get criticized. And, he's held his own as a head coach. So I'm impressed with Philadelphia. I think they're probably one of the best teams in the NFL. But when you look at their schedule, they really haven't beaten anybody. They haven't been tested yet. When you look at the rest of the NFC East, I'm going to be honest with you, the Dallas Cowboys have really surprised me. Now, I'm a Cowboys fan from Philly. I took their under 10.5 wins. I thought that was dead when Tyron Smith got hurt. I thought that was dead when Dak got hurt. But this defense is one of the best defenses in the league. Obviously, Michael Parsons is dominant. And, look, you look at the rest of the teams. The Commanders might be the worst team in the league right now. They can't block anybody. And then when you look at the Giants, I actually took a flyer on the Giants to win the NFC East at 10-1. And I took them to make the playoffs at plus 225. So, look, they're in a rough position. Daniel Jones got hurt. I like the start.
Yep, I think that is really interesting to take a look at that Giants team as well, because I do think that their 3-1 is a little bit of a fool's gold 3-1, but even getting north of a touchdown right now against the Green Bay Packers, given the quarterback uncertainty, what we're noticing in the NFL right now is that, well, when you got a really, really bad quarterback, that can really cost you. But in terms of quarterback play right now, other than Patrick Mahomes, it feels like a lot of these top quarterbacks are not necessarily leading their team necessarily to victories, and all you need is a really good defense and someone that's able to manage a game, like we were talking about a little bit earlier with someone like a Jimmy G, and I would even throw someone like a Cooper Rush, who has actually been really efficient, into that fold as well. Build a good defense, have a competent quarterback. Right now, I think that that's a good formula to win in the NFL.
Oh, yeah, it definitely is. And you look at the game the other day between the Green Bay Packers and the New England Patriots. I felt the Patriots, they lose their starting cornerback, and then obviously you lose your backup quarterback, but their defense kept them in the game. And I think the one thing you're seeing right now is with scoring at like an all-time low from what we've seen the last couple of years, defense is winning a lot of these games. So if you have a solid defense, as long as you don't, you're not committing turnovers and whatnot, you have a chance to win.
Yep, and I do think that it's going to be very fascinating to see if Daniel Jones cannot play, what the Giants are going to be able to drum up, because Tyrod Taylor also left with a concussion, and as we know, concussions top of mind in terms of the NFL, because we saw that with Tua and now the Miami Dolphins, a team that they've gotten off to a nice start. When Tua was out there on the field, I was feeling very good about them, but in terms of the Dolphins, you got to figure that Tua is going to be on the sidelines for, at the very minimum, the first few games here down the stretch, because, well, there is a lot of anger from the NFL Players Association and just folks that watch these games in general, and I think rightfully so if you take a look at just what happened the last few weeks. But in terms of the Miami Dolphins, I feel like they're one of the most intriguing teams in the NFL, and though it's a step down having Teddy Bridgewater, he's still a very capable quarterback that I think a lot of people forget. Each of the last 2 seasons, he threw for over 3,000 yards.
Yeah, I think Teddy Bridgewater is the quintessential backup quarterback. You look at a guy who's 24-6, all time. I call him Teddy Covers, because
Yeah.
this guy comes in and covers, and like I think he's in a good position. Now look, he almost won that that Bengals game last week. I mean, obviously he had the miscommunication which led to the interception, but they were in that game. And look, I think they're playing a Jets team with Zach Wilson. To me, Zach Wilson is probably one of the worst quarterbacks in the league. I still don't trust him. There's a reason why you saw that line go from 3 to 3.5 today, and I agree with the line move personally.
Yep, and when it comes down to it as well with the Miami Dolphins, I'm still actually seeing a lot of threes right now, and, well, I think that if you're able to get a 3, that's very good value in my opinion. And when it comes to just Zach Wilson in general, I recognize that the Jets were able to get the job done on Sunday, but I think that just spoke more to the Steelers not being who they have been in past years. Now, the team is still giving a lot of fight, but this might be one of the least talented teams I've seen in quite a while for Pittsburgh, and I think that this is a Steelers bunch that they're going to be able to eke out a few wins, but in terms of just talent and talent alone, they're a bottom 5 team for me.
Oh, yeah, without a doubt. And Mike Tomlin, he normally can get his team to 500, but I don't think it's going to happen this year. I mean, they threw out there with Trubisky. Trubisky isn't the answer. He hasn't been the answer. I know a few guys were betting Mitchell Trubisky to win MVP in one of his final seasons with the Bears, but look, he's just not the guy. And then they threw in Kenny Pickett. He made a ton of mistakes. So I think Tom's going to struggle to get this team there, and then obviously T.J. Watt is still hurt. So this is just a down year for the Steelers.
There's always one of those guys every single year that gets a lot of attention when it comes to the futures market. I mean, this year, it turned out to be with the San Francisco 49ers, Trey Lance, and, well, that's a unfortunate way for your ticket to be settled. You want to see guys be able to do it out there on the field, but it feels like year in and year out, we get a little bit of buzz, and sometimes these guys come up snake eyes. But speaking of coming up snake eyes, for me, I was very high on the New Orleans Saints coming into the year. They have not been able to live up to the billing. They had the double doink out across the pond last week, but still, I'm not bullish on them. And now they have to come off of coming back from London. They don't get a bye, and they play against the Seattle Seahawks team that one of the most pleasant surprises this year has been Geno Smith. The difference between Geno Smith and Russell Wilson has been significantly less than I think anyone ever thought it was going to be. And with the Seattle Seahawks catching between 5 and 5.5 points, I think that this is a good spot, especially given the travel that the Saints had to overcome.
I think this is a really tough matchup because typically a lot of times when you have these teams who play these London games in the past, they typically have their bye week after that. This year is different. For whatever reason, the Saints and the Minnesota Vikings, they're not taking their bye week. So we haven't seen that before. So this is an interesting scenario. I don't know how that's going to play out. But when I'm looking at the matchup between the Saints and the Seahawks, to me, the Seahawks, they've been kind of getting by on smoke and mirrors. Look, when you look at Geno Smith, right? He had his big game against the Lions, who give up points against everybody. He had a solid game against the Broncos, who were like it was a real emotional spot. But their one game against a real team, the 49ers, they didn't score an offensive touchdown. So even though the Saints have been a little rough, I think I would be looking to back the Saints here.
I think that it is going to be interesting to look at that because with the Saints, offense has been brutal, no question about it, but the defense has been very good to your point as well. And I wanted to throw this in here because someone tweeted at me, and I will give credit where credit is due. Scott Pearson Eberly actually tweeted at me that with the Vikings, they had the option to be able to take the bye after coming back from London, but they have to have their bye a little bit later on during the season. So I actually do appreciate that note because myself and David Baker were talking about that as well because I did find that to be very strange, but I do think that that's one of the most intriguing things that we're finding on the card. And for me, like I said, the Saints, one of my biggest disappointments this season. In terms of what you've been seeing, Raheem, who's been a team that has just not lived up to the billing that you had for them coming into the season?
I agree with you on the Saints. I'm going to be honest with you. The Saints were very disappointing. I mean, obviously, I took their over on the win total. I took them to make the playoffs. I actually took them as a flyer to win the NFC South because I wasn't that much of a believer in the Buccaneers. And I know a lot of people weren't fading Tom Brady, but to me, they come in with offensive line trouble. They come in with issues as far as their wide receivers banged up and whatnot. So I thought the Saints would be able to make the leap, and they just haven't.
Yep, I am right there with you in terms of the Buccaneers. And I mean, with the Buccaneers, they haven't necessarily been too great. But with that said, it's been a team that has been all sorts of banged up as well. So we shall see when they get more of their pieces back how they're going to be able to perform as well. And when it comes to the Baltimore Ravens as well, I do think that they're of intrigue. They're going to be going up against the Cincinnati Bengals that's right around a 3-point favorite. I know that you've been relatively high on the Baltimore Ravens. I always do that. You mix up.
You're a big baseball guy, so I get it.
Absolutely. And hey, your Philadelphia Phillies, they were able to do a nice job as well as they make the postseason as well. So we're going to need to touch upon that on the other side. But I do think that taking a look at this Ravens team, I know that one that you've been relatively high on, one that I have been high on as well, is going to be of intrigue as they're going to be playing against the Cincinnati Bengals in a line that we're currently seeing right around 3. I know that there's a lot of cases to be made for both teams, so we're going to be discussing that with Raheem Palmer next right here on VSiN, the Sports Betting Network. Back here on the Greg Peterson Experience on VSiN, the Sports Betting Network, being rejoined by Raheem Palmer. Does great work at the Ringer. He is joining me in studio, and we mentioned this game before the break, the Ravens and the Cincinnati Bengals, and right now we've got the Ravens as a 3-point favorite, and for the Ravens, I've been a little bit disappointed by the defense thus far. The offense has left something to be desired in the second half, but Lamar Jackson has been amazing for this team. I don't know where you stand, but I just still don't know if I can warm up to take the Cincinnati Bengals in this game just because Joe Burrow has been very turnover prone, and it feels like has hurt his team a little bit with his offensive line not being able to hold up.
Yeah, this is a tough one. I think, a lot of the sharp money came through and took the 3.5, and I think now we're down to 3, and I think that's probably like a fair number. It's tough. I mean, look, you never really want to fade Harbaugh at home, and they did disappoint some bettors. If you hopped in late on the Ravens and got a 3, you push in a game where they were up 20-3. And look, you look at the 2 losses that they've had this season. It came from the offense struggling in the second half and not being able to sustain itself. So this is a different Ravens team that we're used to seeing. In the past, the Ravens were able to run the ball. They haven't been able to run the ball with any consistency. So this is a tough one. I think if I lean anyway, I would lean with Cincinnati just because I do think they can keep up offensively, and I do think that this Ravens secondary isn't really great. So.
And when it comes to the AFC in general, I'm having a tough time making out who the top teams are outside of the Kansas City Chiefs. I feel like we were all hyping up this AFC West. We were all trying to make a case that the Kansas City Chiefs were not the top team. Well, I think that it all comes back to the Ric Flair mentality. In order to be the champ, you got to beat the champ. And for the Kansas City Chiefs, they once again just look like by far the top team. And I think that it's really just looking for who's number 2 in that entire conference because the Chiefs, they just once again are looking like the same old Chiefs. And I don't understand why people, including myself to a little bit of an extent, were doubting them.
Well, I'm going to be honest with you. I think my model actually has Buffalo power rated as the best.
Yeah, Buffalo as well.
They have them power rated as the best team in the league. But when you look at everybody else, I mean, look, the Chargers to me, look, they've dealt with some injuries. But if you watch their game against Kansas City, they look like the better team to me. And then obviously they had that interception which completely swung the game. But they've dealt with injuries over the last couple of weeks, and I think the market isn't respecting the Chargers. I mean, you had a lot of sharp money on the Texans last week coming off of a game in which the Chargers were banged up and got dominated by the Jaguars. And then look at this week. I mean, look, this line is at 2.5, 3 now against the Cleveland Browns. I think the Chargers have some value this week. I'm not seeing why the Chargers are being undervalued the way they are, despite the fact that they've had some injuries.
And with the Chargers, I feel like in terms of talent and talent alone on paper, when they are fully healthy, so obviously I've thrown there a lot of disclaimers, they're a top 5 team in the NFL, but I do feel like there are quite a few questions, and I do feel like there needs to be a coming of age with a lot of these players because you've got the defense that's currently in its prime. You've tried for Khalil Mack, so that tells you that they're all in, but I do fear that the injury to Bosa is really going to be hurting them as well because I think that is a big factor along with the ailments that we're seeing on the offensive line.
Oh, yeah, I mean, without a doubt. I mean, you lose a guy like Bosa, it's huge, but I mean, they came into the season with so many injuries, even to their secondary. But I just think when you have a guy like Justin Herbert, I mean, Justin Herbert to me is, top 5 quarterback already. And we're seeing it. He's had to overcome so much on his team. And I think eventually as this season goes on, I think you're going to see that the Chargers are one of the top teams in the AFC, along with the Chiefs and the Buffalo Bills. I think if you're looking outside of that, look, the Dolphins look pretty good. I think, Tua has his limitations, obviously.
Yep, and with Tua, who knows when we're going to be seeing him back out there on the field because I know that the NFLPA, and rightfully so, they're making a lot of qualms as to what has all happened in terms of his concussion protocol, and we're seeing all the jokes on social media. I don't think that's necessarily a joking situation personally, but it's certainly not too terrific to see. But when it comes to teams that we're looking to back and teams that we're looking to fade, I take a look at this Detroit versus New England line, and with the Patriots being a 3-point favorite, I do think that it's a little bit befuddling. Now, the status of Mac Jones, it looks like it's a little bit more rosy for this week than it was last week. We saw Bailey Zappi have a good effort against the Green Bay Packers, which I thought was a little bit surprising, but I really like what I've seen out of the Detroit Lions, and giving them a full 3, I think, might be a little bit of disrespect to them at this point.
I got to disagree with you there. I love you, but I just think when you look at this Detroit Lions team, I just think they're one of the worst defenses in the league. And look, they made Geno Smith look like Joe Montana last week. He just walked the ball up the field. And I just think, like, for whatever reason, bettors are just backing this Detroit Lions team. And look, to me, you saw the way, they dominated the Minnesota Vikings in that first half, but you saw the way the Minnesota Vikings were able to throw their way back into the game. Like, the Eagles blew them out. I just think this is a team who, like, because they were on Hard Knocks and because they covered so many games last year, I think they're being overvalued by the market. So I understand why. I think a lot of sharp money came in on New England, who has the better defense, probably the better coach, obviously. Bill Belichick is the Hall of Fame coach, won 7 Super Bowls. I can't back Detroit, I'm going to be honest with you.
And when it comes to the Detroit Lions, to your point, they have the most combined points scored and allowed through 4 games that we've seen in NFL history, which I think is so interesting because we've been seeing the unders come through. 60.3% of games in the NFL have went under the total, and yet you've got the Detroit Lions who have completely bucked that trend because they are both scoring and they're giving it up, which I honestly do think is interesting to take a look at because with a lot of these totals, we've seen them crater quite a bit. They seem to be a little bit higher this week, but I think that that's just based on the matchups, like with the Eagles versus the Cardinals game that's currently sitting at right around a 49.5. The Falcons have the Buccaneers game that's sitting in the neighborhood about a 48 as well. When it comes to what we're going to be getting in terms of the game that I alluded to a little bit earlier, in terms of Lions and Patriots, that's up to a 46.5. And for a Patriots game, that's relatively high. And I do think that taking a look at totals is going to be fascinating as well because we saw more of a 50-50 split this week in terms of overs and unders. It was just an underfest first 3 weeks of the season. And I do think that bookmakers are starting to find their bearings. And I think that's going to be interesting to see if we do see a little bit of a bounce back in terms of the overs a little bit further to where they have a couple profitable weeks because the overs just have not been hitting thus far this season.
Yeah, I think, when you look at the way the NFL is going with teams not playing in the preseason, like these first couple of weeks are basically the preseason for a lot of these teams. And then I think when you look at certain other aspects, obviously we had some weather suppressed totals. Like, you look at this Baltimore Ravens and Buffalo Bills game on Sunday. You had a lot of rain. Like, I think if it's not for the rain and all the wind and everything like that, I think that total goes well over. So I think, obviously odds makers always adjust, the market adjusts, so eventually you're going to see more overs.
I do think so as well. I do think that they're starting to come, and I think that perhaps what we saw in week 4 is a little bit of just a sign of that. And then when it just comes to the week 5 slate in general, is there anything that you've really starred that maybe we haven't touched upon that you're really looking to bet, or maybe you're already fired in on an opener?
Well, I told you I like that Miami game. I think that's a good pick. I like the Tampa Bay Buccaneers on a teaser. I'm a little frustrated because of the Browns. Last week they kind of blew that game against the Falcons, but this Falcons defense really isn't good. And I think the Tampa Bay Buccaneers should be able to push them around, so they should be able to cover that teaser leg. Also, I'm looking at the Chargers. I'm going to be honest with you. I just think the Cleveland Browns, they leave a lot. They're very disappointing defensively. I don't know if Myles Garrett is coming back, but Jadeveon Clowney should be out. And I just don't think they're going to be able to hang point for point with this Chargers team. I also think that's an over. So I'm looking at those. I kind of recommended on the Ringer Gambling podcast earlier because we like the 49ers. I actually recommended that, you go take some 49ers before the game. I think the look-ahead line was 5.
I'm seeing a lot of 5.5 right now. Yep.
Yeah, I just think this Carolina Panthers team is done. I'm going to be honest with you. I think Matt Rule and Baker Mayfield, they're just – look, Baker Mayfield is struggling in a clean pocket. So if he has to deal with the 49ers who just have a ton of pressure, I think they're in a bad spot. So, like, when the team totals pop, I'm going to be looking to take their team total under. I just think the Carolina Panthers are done. The one interesting line that I'm actually really interested in is the Tennessee Titans versus the Washington Commanders.
Oh, yes. Because with the Washington Commanders, I just can't bring myself to bet on Carson Wentz at this point. Every single time I watch that guy, it's just like, boy. And for the Tennessee Titans, you can tell that they've taken a step back I would personally take the Titans right now. I'm not sure if you would or would not, but I just can't bet on the Commanders right now.
You know, the Commanders, they're really struggling on the offensive line, but I think they're supposed to get their running back this week. There's a part of me that thinks that's a good teaser leg, the Washington football team. Mm-hmm. And I want to see how far this line goes because I might have an appetite for the Commanders.
Right now, the Titans are a 2.5-point favorite, but always a favorite of this show. That would be you, Raheem. Always do appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. It was always an honor.
Always love having Raheem in studio. And coming up next, I give you my DK Nation pick for the MLB slate on Tuesday here on VSiN, the Sports Betting Network.